She slammed both hands on the cafe counter and said, "I am not invisible." Nobody moved. Nobody even looked up. Marin Cole, 29 years old, 8 months pregnant, sitting in a wheelchair with 3 rejection letters stuffed in her bag, had just done the bravest thing she'd done in months. And the room gave her nothing. But across that crowded cafe, one man put down his coffee, slowly, deliberately, and stood up. What happened next didn't just change her day. It cracked open a story none of them saw coming. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You're going to want to stay for this one. The morning had already beaten Marin Cole down before she even got through the door. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, just settles in your bones and stays there. The sidewalk outside of Brewer Street Café was cracked in 2 places, and the wheels of her chair caught on the second crack so hard that her whole body lurched forward. She grabbed the armrests. Her coffee, the one she'd made at home in a travel mug, because she couldn't afford the cafe prices, but had come anyway for the Wi-Fi, and a table splashed against the lid and soaked her sleeve. She didn't say anything. She just breathed. 1 breath. 2. Then she pushed forward. The door to the cafe was heavy. It always was. There was no automatic opener, and the little bell above the frame rang the second she wedged the door with her footrest and muscled herself inside, and for one brief second, the whole place looked up. 7 people at tables, a barista behind the counter, a man near the window on his laptop, a woman with a stroller, a couple arguing quietly over a receipt. Every single one of them looked right at her, right at the wheelchair. The enormous curve of her belly pressing against her jacket. And then, one by one, they looked away. Back to phones, back to cups, back to whatever mattered more than the woman in the doorway, trying to hold a door open with her front wheel while her sleeve dripped coffee onto the floor. Marin let the door close behind her. "Okay," she whispered to herself. The word didn't mean anything. It was just something she said when the alternative was crying in public, which she had done exactly once since the pregnancy in a Walgreens parking lot at 11 at night, and she had promised herself that was the last time. She navigated toward an open table near the far wall. It was the only one with enough space for her chair to fit comfortably, and she moved toward it with the kind of careful precision that comes from 8 months of practice, angling around corners, calculating gaps, reading the room like a chessboard. She was 3 feet from the table when a man in a gray hoodie pushed his chair back without looking and blocked the entire aisle. He was deep in a phone call. One hand pressed to his ear, the other gesturing at nothing. He didn't even register that he'd done it. Marin stopped. She waited. He kept talking. Something about a shipment. Something about a vendor. Something that to him was clearly the most important thing happening in the world at that moment. "Excuse me," Marin said. He held up one finger. One finger. "The universal sign for you are less important than this phone call." Marin's jaw tightened. She looked down at her lap at the folder sitting there, the one with the 3 rejection letters inside it, the one she'd been carrying for 2 weeks, like a kind of penance, like if she held onto the proof of how badly things were going, maybe the universe would eventually feel sorry enough to change direction. She looked. "Sir," she said louder this time, "I need to get through." He turned, slightly saw her, and she would remember this moment for a long time, visibly sighed before stepping just far enough to one side that she could, if she squeezed, maybe get through. She squeezed through. She made it to the table. She set the folder down, plugged in her laptop charger, and stared at the screen for a full minute before she realized her hands were shaking. The barista's name was Danny. She was 22, and kind in the way that young people are kind when they haven't yet learned to be cautious about it openly, instinctively, without thinking about whether it would cost her anything. She came over with a glass of water nobody had asked for and set it on Marin's table. "You okay?" Danny asked. "Fine," Marin said. Then, because Danny was still standing there, "Thank you. For the water." "Sure," Danny hesitated. "You want anything? We have decaf if..." "I'm okay." Marin pulled up her email. 43 unread messages. She could see from the subject lines that 38 of them were junk, The other 5 she didn't want to open. "I just need the Wi-Fi for a while. Is that all right?" "Stay as long as you want," Danny said and walked back to the counter. Marin stared at her inbox. The 5th unread email was from the Hendricks Property Group. She knew before she opened it what it was going to say because she had a talent. She'd had it since she was a teenager, growing up in a house where the other shoe was always waiting to drop for sensing bad news before it arrived the way some people can smell rain. She opened it anyway. "Dear Miss Cole, we regret to inform you that your application for the accessible unit at 4410 Mercer Street has been declined at this time." She stopped reading. She closed the laptop, picked up the water glass that Danny had brought and held it in both hands, not drinking it, just holding it because it was cold and solid and real. And those were 3 things that her life had been in short supply of for the past 7 months. 7 months since Dominic had left. Not left like walked out the door with a suitcase, though that happened too eventually, but left in the way that happened first, which was the quiet way, the invisible way, the way where one day you realize the person sitting across the table from you has already decided they're gone. They just haven't told you yet. She'd been 4 weeks pregnant when she told him. She remembered that she'd been nervous, not about the pregnancy itself, but about his reaction because even then, even before she had the language to describe what was wrong with them, she could feel it in the way he paused before answering questions, the way his eyes went somewhere else in the middle of conversations, like he was already doing the math. "Are you sure?" he'd asked. "Yes, I'm sure." "And you want to keep it?" she'd said. "Yes." He'd nodded. Long pause. "Okay." That okay had haunted her for months afterward. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't even resignation. It was the sound of a door closing softly, so no one would hear it. 6 weeks later, she'd been in a car accident. Not serious, a fender bender at a red light, some idiot on his phone. But her back had been hurt, and the nerve damage had turned out to be the kind that settled in and made itself comfortable. And 3 months later, she was in a wheelchair. Not forever or so, the doctor said, though they were careful with the word forever. Tended to avoid it the way you avoid a sore tooth, but for now. Possibly for the foreseeable future. Definitely for the rest of the pregnancy. Dominic had lasted 2 more weeks after that. Then he was gone. She hadn't cried when he left. She'd been too angry. She'd cried 2 weeks later in a Walgreens parking lot when she realized that anger only lasts so long, and underneath it was something much harder to carry. The wheel caught on a chair leg. It happened fast, and completely without warning she'd shifted to reach the charger she'd accidentally kicked under the table. And the left wheel of her chair snagged the metal foot of the chair next to her, and the whole thing lurched sideways in a way that sent her folder sliding off her lap paper, scattering across the floor, and her body tilting at an angle that for one terrible stomach-dropping second felt like it was going to keep going. She grabbed the table. The table held, but the folder was on the floor. The rejection letters were face up on the floor, and the travel mug had tipped and was rolling toward the next table, leaving a thin trail of cold coffee across the tile. And the room looked up again. Same 7 people, same instant of attention, same collective pause. And then, one by one, they looked away again. Except for one. The man was sitting 2 tables over near the wall. She hadn't noticed him before, or maybe she had and hadn't registered him early 30s. She thought maybe closer to her age than she'd first guessed, with the kind of tired that lives in the set of someone's shoulders, rather than under their eyes. He was sitting with a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, who was drawing something in a notebook with absolute concentration, tongue pressed to her lower lip. He wasn't reaching for his phone. He wasn't looking away. He was already standing up. He didn't rush. That was the thing she noticed first. He didn't scramble over like she was an emergency, or a crisis, or a problem to be managed. He just stood up, the way you stand up to get a glass of water, easy and natural. And he crossed to her table. He picked up the travel mug first, set it upright. Then he crouched down and gathered the papers, not reading them. She noticed not even glancing at the letterheads, and stacked them neatly, and placed them on the table beside her. Then he looked at the chair that had caught her wheel. He looked at it for a moment, like he was figuring something out. Then he simply reached over, picked it up, and moved it 3 feet to the left, out of her way completely. "There," he said. Not triumphantly. Not like he'd done something remarkable. Just there, the way you say it, when you fixed something small and the fix is done, and that's the whole story. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. And then, because she was Marin Cole and she had a problem with silence, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, and he almost went back to his table. She could see it, the movement starting in his feet, the slight shift of weight. But then he stopped. "You all right?" "Fine." "Okay." He nodded. "Just the way that chair caught, I wanted to make sure you—" "I'm fine," she said again. And then softer. "Really? Thank you." He went back to his table. She watched him go. She watched him sit back down across from the little girl, who hadn't looked up from her drawing, who was still completely absorbed in whatever she was making. He glanced at the drawing, said something Marin couldn't hear, and the little girl laughed a quick, bright sound that cut across the ambient noise of the cafe like a bird call. Marin looked back at her laptop, opened it, stared at the inbox, closed it again. She didn't know why she said it. She would think about that later, and she still wouldn't have a clean answer. Maybe it was the 3 rejection letters. Maybe it was the email she just read. Maybe it was the man in the gray hoodie and his one finger. Maybe it was 8 months of fighting for everything and being exhausted in a way that sleep didn't touch. She leaned slightly toward the next table and said, "How old is she?" The man looked up. "5, he said. "Almost 6. She'll tell you it's basically the same thing." "What's she drawing?" He glanced at the notebook, then back at Marin. "I genuinely have no idea. I've learned not to ask until she's finished, because if you interrupt her, she starts over." "Smart kid." "Terrifyingly," he said, and something that was almost a smile crossed his face. "I'm Jesse." "Marin." He nodded at the closed laptop. "Job hunting." She glanced at it. "Apartments, actually. And I've been doing some freelance work applications, so both, I guess." "Tough market," he said. "That's a polite way to put it." She looked at the folder. The letters were stacked neatly now, thanks to him. But the top one was still visible. She could see the edge of it, the RE application for housing assistance, printed at the top. "How long have you been in the city?" "About 3 years." He paused. "Moved here for work. Stayed for—" He glanced at the little girl. "Reasons?" Marin followed his gaze. The little girl had added something new to her drawing and was now inspecting it at close range, holding the notebook up to her face. "Her mother?" Marin asked, and then immediately said, "Sorry, that's none of—" "It's okay." He said it quickly without hesitation, which told her he'd answered the question before. "She passed about 2 years ago." "I'm sorry. Thank you." He said that the same way, practiced not cold, but with the particular cadence of someone who said a thing so many times they found the exact way to say it, that causes the least amount of collateral damage to everyone involved. "We're doing all right." The little girl chose that moment to look up from her notebook. She looked directly at Marin with the specific, unfiltered assessment that only small children and very old people are capable of. "You have a baby in there," she announced. "Lily," Jesse said in the voice that meant we've talked about this. "That's a fact," Marin said. "Not a rude question, just a fact." Lily seemed satisfied with this distinction. "When is it coming out?" "About 6 weeks." Lily processed this. "Is it a girl or a boy?" "I don't know yet." This apparently was the most interesting piece of information Lily had received all morning. She stared at Marin with wide eyes. "You don't know. I wanted it to be a surprise." Lily turned to Jesse with an expression that said she needed a moment to consult her father about this development. Jesse pressed his lips together in the way of someone suppressing something. "I think surprises are good," Marin offered. "Lily is not a fan of surprises," Jesse said. "I like good surprises," Lily corrected, with the firm reasonableness of someone who has given this matter serious consideration. "Not bad ones." "That's fair," Marin said. "Nobody likes bad ones." Lily seemed to accept this as a reasonable common ground and returned to her drawing. They talked for 40 minutes. Not continuously. There were pauses. The natural kind that happen when a conversation is real rather than performed. Lily finished her drawing and started a new one. Jesse got up at some point to get a second coffee and came back with a hot tea that he set on Marin's table without asking, a completely ordinary gesture that somehow caught her so off guard that she had to look at her screen for a moment to collect herself. She found out that he worked in construction management, that he'd grown up in Ohio, that his wife's name had been Rachel, and he said it easily without flinching, the way you say a name when you've made peace with it, or mostly made peace with it, which Jesse seemed to have done in that imperfect, functional way that people do when they don't have the option of not functioning. He found out that she'd been a graphic designer before the accident, that she was from Chicago originally, that she'd moved to the city 3 years ago, which made them both newcomers, though he'd arrived with more infrastructure. He didn't ask about the wheelchair. He didn't ask about the folder with the rejection letters. He didn't ask about the baby's father, and she didn't volunteer anything. She wasn't sure if that was the best or worst thing about the conversation. "I should let you work," he said eventually. He wasn't looking at his phone to check the time. He was watching Lily, who was starting to show the particular signs of 5-year-old restlessness that always precede the end of a public outing. "We've got to pick up some groceries before her nap window closes." "It was nice talking to you," Marin said, and meant it in a way she hadn't expected to mean anything today. Jesse stood. Lily slid off her chair and tucked the notebook under her arm with the dignity of an artist securing her portfolio. "Good luck with the apartment search," Jesse said. "Thanks." She looked at the screen, then back at him. "Jesse," he looked at her. "Thank you for—" She gestured vaguely at the chair. He'd moved the papers. He'd stacked the tea on her table. "All of it." "Wasn't a big deal," he said. "It was to me," she said. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too." He and Lily left. The bell above the door rang. The cafe filled back in around the space where they'd been, and Marin was alone again, which was the same as it had been an hour ago, technically, except that it didn't feel exactly the same. She opened her laptop. She looked at the next email in her inbox. "Dear Miss Cole, we regret to inform you." She closed her eyes, breathed. Outside through the window, she caught a glimpse of Jesse pushing the door open for Lily, holding it so it didn't swing back, his hand resting on her shoulder, as they stepped out onto the broken sidewalk. Two people navigating the same cracked world she was navigating, just with slightly different tools. She opened her eyes. She opened the next application on her screen, and she began to type. She didn't know, sitting in that cafe with her cold coffee sleeve and her stack of rejection letters and her one small conversation with a stranger, that this was the day everything in her life was about to move slowly, then all at once, the way the worst and best things always do. She didn't know that the man who'd moved a chair was going to matter more than she could have imagined. She didn't know what was coming, but she'd gotten back to work. For Marin Cole, that had always been enough to start with. The eviction notice was taped to her door. Not slipped under, not mailed. Taped like whoever had put it there wanted to make sure she saw it before she even got her key out. Wanted the message delivered at full volume before she'd had a chance to set down her bag. Oh, or take off her jacket. Or be inside the one place she was supposed to be safe. Marin sat in the hallway and stared at it for a long moment. The fluorescent light above her buzzed its single broken note. Her neighbor's television murmured something through the wall. The building smelled the way it always smelled, of old carpet, and someone else's dinner, and the particular staleness of a place that hadn't been new in a very long time. She peeled the notice off the door, read it again. 30 days. She unlocked the door and went inside. She didn't cry. She made a mental note of that later. Cataloged it the way she cataloged most things about herself since the accident. Not with pride exactly, but with a kind of grim inventory, the way you check supplies. When you're not sure how long the winter is going to last. 30 days notice. No crying. Good. She set the notice on the kitchen counter next to the two other pieces of paper she'd been ignoring for the past week. a bill from the medical equipment company that had provided her wheelchair, and a letter from her insurance carrier explaining in the careful bureaucratic language of people who've been trained to say no, without technically saying no, that her occupational therapy coverage was being reduced, effective the 1st of next month. She stood in the kitchen for a while. She was aware that she should eat something, but the idea of cooking required a sequence of steps, getting things from the cabinets, navigating the small kitchen, the counter heights that were 3 inches too high for her to work at comfortably, that tonight felt like climbing a mountain she hadn't agreed to climb. She ate crackers over the sink and drank a glass of water and went to bed at 8:30, which was not a defeat, she told herself. It was strategy. You rest when you can, because you never know when you won't be able to. She lay in the dark and put both hands on her belly, feeling the slow movement from inside a knee or a foot or an elbow, she could never quite tell. And she said quietly to the ceiling and to whoever was listening inside her, "I'm working on it. I promise I'm working on it." The baby moved again. Marin took that as acknowledgement. She closed her eyes. She didn't sleep for 2 hours. The next 4 days had the quality of a dream, where you're running, but the ground keeps changing. She called 3 legal aid offices and was put on hold at 2 of them and disconnected at the 3rd. She filed an appeal with the Housing Assistance Program, which required printing and signing a form. She couldn't print because the library's printer was down, and the UPS store charged $1.40 a page, and she had 11 pages. She paid the $14. She signed the forms. She mailed them certified. She came home and discovered that the ramp into her building had developed a new crack along the left edge, wide enough to catch a wheel if you hit it at the wrong angle. She called the building manager and left a message. She did not receive a call back. She redesigned a logo for a client who had found her through an online freelance board 3 hours of work for $60, which she accepted without negotiating because she was not in a position to negotiate. She applied for 2 more accessible housing units. She received 1 rejection by email and 1 by silence, which was its own kind of answer. On the 5th day after the eviction notice, she went back to Brewer Street Café. She told herself it was because of the Wi-Fi. This was partially true. The Wi-Fi at her apartment had been unreliable since the building's router had been updated 2 weeks ago, a fact the building manager had also not returned a call about. The cafe's Wi-Fi was fast and reliable, and Danny always brought her water without being asked. She was being less honest with herself about this, hoping to see Jesse again. She had thought about him more than she'd expected to. Not in the particular way, not with any specific intention attached, but in the way you think about a thing that was unexpectedly good in the middle of a stretch of bad. The way you keep touching a smooth stone in your pocket just because it's smooth. He'd been kind without performing kindness. He'd moved the chair. He'd gotten her tea. He'd talked to her like she was a person in the middle of a life, not a situation in need of a response. That shouldn't have been remarkable. She knew that. It enraged her quietly that it was remarkable. She was at her table for 20 minutes. Her laptop opened a half-finished cover letter on the screen before the bell above the door rang, and she heard the very specific sound of a 5-year-old entering a public space, which is somewhere between a statement and an announcement. "It has the same Wi-Fi password as last time," Lily said. This was apparently the information she'd been building up to deliver since leaving the car. "Good memory," Jesse said behind her. "I wrote it down," Lily said with tremendous dignity, and held up a small purple notebook as evidence. Marin smiled before she could decide not to. Jesse saw her. He paused. Then, something in his expression settled. Not surprise exactly, more like the quiet recalibration of someone whose day has just changed in a direction they hadn't expected, but aren't unhappy about. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. Lily looked at Marin, then at Jesse, then back at Marin with the particular scrutiny of a child doing calculations. "The baby isn't out yet," Lily observed. "Not yet," Marin agreed. "How much longer?" "About 5 weeks." Lily turned to her father. "That's still a long time." "It is," Jesse agreed, and guided her toward the table next to Marin's, which she noticed he chose deliberately rather than any of the other open tables, and which she also noticed she was paying too close attention to. They got settled. Lily opened her purple notebook. Jesse ordered at the counter and came back with a coffee, and what turned out to be a hot chocolate that he'd apparently ordered for Lily without asking, which meant he was the kind of father who had the order memorized, which was one of those small, specific details that tells you more about a person than most of their answers to direct questions. "How's the apartment search?" he asked, nodding toward her screen. She almost said fine. It was right there, the word sitting at the front of her mouth where she kept it for easy access. But something about the way he asked, not brightly, not socially, but with the tone of someone who actually wanted to know, made her hesitate. "I got an eviction notice 5 days ago," she said. Jesse was quiet for a beat. Not the kind of quiet that means discomfort. The kind that means he was actually listening, which was rarer than it should have been. 30 days, he asked. 30 days. "Have you talked to a lawyer? Legal aid?" "I'm on a list." She looked at the screen. I filed an appeal with the housing authority. But the wait times they're talking about months, and I have—" She didn't finish the sentence. She gestured instead vaguely at herself, which covered the wheelchair and the pregnancy, and the general situation with sufficient economy. "What's the grounds for the eviction?" Jesse asked. "Supposedly I'm behind on rent." She turned back to him. "Which I am, by 3 weeks. But I was on a payment plan which the previous building manager approved, and then the property management company changed hands in September, and the new management is—" She stopped. "I have documentation of the payment plan. I just need time to get it in front of someone who can do something with it." Jesse nodded slowly. "My brother-in-law is a paralegal," he said. "He mostly does contract work, but he knows tenant law. He helped a guy in my building last year with something similar." He paused. "I could give you his number. No obligation. He might just be able to tell you if the appeal has legs." She looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know." He said it the same way he'd said it the first time in this cafe 5 days ago. "I know." Like the fact that he didn't have to was not the point, had never been. The point was actually beside the point. Marin looked at her screen. At the cover letter she'd been staring at for 30 minutes without adding a word. At the familiar white rectangle of another application window in the taskbar. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, thank you." He texted her the number right then, and she heard her phone buzz in her bag. His name was Carl, and he called her back in 45 minutes, which in the context of Marin's recent experience with people who were supposed to help her, felt almost shockingly fast. He had the voice of someone who'd been explaining things to people in bad situations for a long time, patient efficient, without either false cheer or unnecessary gravity. He listened to the whole thing. The payment plan, the management change, the notice, the appeal. He asked 3 specific questions. Then he was quiet for a second. "Okay," he said. "So here's the thing. If you have documentation of that payment plan, written confirmation emails, anything, the new management can't void it without proper notice under state tenant protection law. What they did here has problems." He paused. "I'm not saying it's a slam dunk, but it's not nothing. Do you have those emails?" "Yes," she said. "Oh, forward them to me. I'll look at them tonight and tell you what I think." "What do you charge?" "Jesse asked me to take a look, so nothing for the initial review." He said it simply with no drama attached to it. "If it turns into something that needs actual filing, we'd talk about it then. But let's see what we have first." She forwarded the emails. She sat in her apartment afterward and stared at her phone for a while. She was aware of a feeling she didn't entirely trust something that was close to hope, but that she'd learned to treat cautiously, the way you treat a floor after a flood, testing each step before you commit your weight. She picked up her phone and texted Jesse. Carl called. "He thinks there might be something there. He's looking at my emails tonight. Thank you." The response came a few minutes later. "Good. Let me know what he says." Then, after a second, "Lily wants to know if you've thought of a name yet." Marin laughed, actually laughed a short, surprised sound that she hadn't heard from herself in a while. She typed back, "Tell her, I'm open to suggestions." 3 dots appeared. Then, she says Lily is a very good name and statistically underused. Marin was still smiling when she put the phone down. Then She looked at the eviction notice on the counter, then at the medical bill, then at the insurance letter. The smile faded. Not completely, just to whatever size smiles are allowed to be when you're looking at a counter full of the things that are trying to take you down. She pulled the laptop toward her and kept working. She ran into him 3 more times that week. Once at the cafe, once at the pharmacy, 2 blocks from her building, where she saw him in the over-the-counter aisle. And they ended up talking for 20 minutes, while Lily systematically tested every lotion tester on the display rack. Once at the park, where she'd gone on a Thursday afternoon because her back was bad, and the physical therapist had said fresh air and gentle movement, and she'd found Jessie on a bench, while Lily fed ducks with a professional seriousness that suggested she had strong opinions about duck nutrition. She's going to be an ecologist, Jessie said, watching Lily divide a piece of bread into precise portions. Or a dictator, Marin offered. I think those might have more overlap than we want to admit. She laughed again. It kept catching her off guard, the laughing like a muscle she'd forgotten she had. She was learning things about him in the accumulative way you learn things about people when the conversations are real. Not in a single intake interview, but in layers, a detail, here a story there. The pattern building slowly until you can see the shape of a person. He'd met Rachel in college. They'd been together for 7 years before they got married. And then Lily had arrived. And then 3 years after that, Rachel had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She died 14 months later. He told her about Rachel, the same way he told her the first time steady, without drama, in the tone of a man who'd processed a grief large enough to have its own gravitational field, and learned to live inside it rather than trying to get out. How do you do that? Marin asked once at the park, while Lily argued with a duck about bread distribution fairness. Do what? Talk about it like that, without, she looked for the word, falling apart. He thought about it. I think you fall apart enough times that eventually you learn where the floor is, he said. And once you know where the floor is, you're less scared of falling because you know you'll land somewhere. She looked at him. That's either very wise or very dark. Probably both. He glanced at her. You'll figure out where your floor is too. She didn't say anything to that. She watched Lily, who had apparently resolved the duck dispute in her favor, and was now distributing bread with the satisfied air of a diplomat after a successful negotiation. The baby's father, Jessie said, and then stopped. Sorry, you don't have to, no, it's... She shifted in her chair. His name is Dominic. He left when I ended up in the chair. She said it flatly because flat was the only way she could say it without it becoming something larger. He'd been checked out for a while. The wheelchair just gave him a legible excuse. Jessie was quiet. The worst part, she said, isn't even that he left. It's that I'm not surprised he left, and I can't decide if that says more about him or about me. It says you were paying attention, Jessie said. She looked at him. You're generous with your interpretations. I've been told that. He picked up his coffee cup, realized it was empty, set it back down. Has he been in contact? No. She paused. Not yet. The not yet hung between them. Jessie heard it. She could tell by the slight change in his expression, the careful neutrality of a man deciding not to push on something. Carl thinks the appeal is solid, she said, changing direction. He sent me a draft response letter last night. Good, Jessie nodded. Carl's thorough. If he says it's solid, it's solid. I've never had someone just... She stopped again. What? Help, she said quietly. Just help. Without it being... She spread one hand. Complicated. Conditional. Something that costs more than it's worth. Jessie looked at her steadily. That's what help is supposed to be. I know, she said. I just forgot. Carl's letter went out on a Wednesday. By Friday, she'd received a response from the property management company's attorney brief. Formal, and notably less aggressive than the original notice. Carl called her that evening. They're blinking, he said. The payment plan documentation is stronger than they expected. My read is they want this to go away quietly. I think we can get you a formal extension and a revised agreement. How long an extension? I'm pushing for 90 days and a restructured payment schedule. I won't get everything I ask for, but I'll get something workable. He paused. You holding up okay? Yes, she said, and then, carefully testing the word, yeah, I actually am. She sat with that for a while after she hung up. The eviction notice was still on her counter. The medical bill was still there. The insurance letter, and nothing had been solved, not really, not yet. There were still 30 conversations and 40 phone calls and some number of hard months between where she was and anything resembling solid ground. But she was not where she'd been 10 days ago. 10 days ago, she'd been alone in this apartment with a stack of papers and a floor that felt like it was giving way. Tonight she had a letter in motion and a paralegal on her side, and the strange, fragile, completely unexpected sense that someone was standing near enough to catch her if the floor went again. She picked up her phone, typed, "To Jesse, Carl, thinks we can get the extension. He said they're blinking." The reply came quickly. "Told you he was thorough." She looked at the message for a second. Then she typed, "How do you thank someone for something like this?" I can't even." She stopped, deleted that, started again. "Jesse, seriously, thank you." The response this time took a little longer. Then, "You've been fighting this whole thing alone for months. You deserve someone in your corner. Don't thank me for that." She read it twice. Then, she set the phone down and pressed her hands flat on the counter and breathed. Her daughter she'd decided tonight without ceremony, without announcement, just quietly and privately, and with complete certainty, her daughter was going to know this. Was going to grow up knowing this. That people could be this. That help could exist without conditions, that kindness could be a simple, clean thing, that you could find a person in a crowded cafe who moved a chair out of your way and genuinely meant it, in ways that echoed out further than either of you could see from where you were standing. She was going to make sure her daughter knew that. She owed her at least that. She went to bed that night before 10, which was still early, but felt different than it had to 2 weeks ago. Not escape, but rest. The actual kind. She put her hands on her belly in the dark. "Still working on it," she said, "but I think we're going to be okay." The baby moved, one long, slow shift, like an acknowledgement. Marin closed her eyes. This time she slept. Carl got them the extension. 90 days, a restructured payment schedule, and a written acknowledgement from the property management company that the original eviction notice had been issued without proper account of the existing payment agreement. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a solution. But it was actual solid ground, and Marin stood on it the way you stand on something after a long time of not being sure the floor would hold. Carefully, with full awareness of how recently there had been nothing there. She called Carl to thank him, and he said, "Don't thank me. Thank your documentation. You kept everything." He paused. "Most people don't keep everything." "I grew up in a house where you kept everything," she said. "Receipts, letters, voicemails. My mother used to say that if you couldn't prove it happened, people would act like it didn't." "Your mother was right," Carl said. "Call me if anything changes." She called Jesse next. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear Lily in the background narrating something with great urgency. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably the tone of a child who has an important announcement and is not interested in waiting for a pause in adult conversation. 90 days, Marin said, and they put it in writing. There was a brief second, and then Jesse said, "Good. That's really good, Marin." "Tell Lily we're okay," she said, which surprised her slightly. She hadn't planned to say it that way, but it came out and sat there and turned out to be exactly the right thing to say, because she heard Jesse relay it, and she heard Lily's response, which was apparently enthusiastic enough to require physical expression, because Jesse laughed a real laugh, unguarded, the kind that means something got through the careful composure. "She's doing a victory lap around the couch," he said. "She's a good cheerleader. She's a force of nature is what she is." He got quieter. "Are you doing okay, really?" "I'm doing better than I was," she said, which was honest, which was the best could manage, which was enough. "I'm going to finish this cover letter I've been avoiding for a week, and then I'm going to eat something that isn't crackers. That's the plan." "That's a solid plan." "I thought so." She looked at the eviction notice still sitting on her counter, which she hadn't thrown away yet. She wasn't sure why. Maybe the same instinct her mother had taught her. Keep the record. Keep the proof. "Jesse, I want you to know
You don't have to. Let me say it, she said, firm but not sharp. He waited. I want you to know that whatever happens from here, you change something for me. Not just the apartment thing. I mean, you moved a chair. That's where it started.
You moved a chair and picked up some papers and got me a cup of tea and treated me like a person who was having a hard time instead of a problem that needed managing. She stopped. I needed to say that out loud to someone, so that's what I needed to say. The line was quiet for a moment. I'm glad I sat down, Jessie said. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it.
Me too. After she hung up, she finished the cover letter. Then, she made herself actual food pasta from a box, nothing impressive but warm and real, and she ate it at her table and looked at the extension letter, and felt for the first time in a long time like she was managing her life rather than just surviving it. She should have known it was too quiet to last. The letter arrived 9 days later. It came certified mail, which meant she had to sign for it, which meant she had the particular experience of signing her name on a little screen in the hallway, while already understanding on some animal level before she'd even opened the envelope that this was going to be the kind of news you don't fully absorb standing up. She went inside, sat at her table, opened the envelope. The letterhead read, Harmon and Briggs Attorneys at Law. Below that, in the clean, impersonal language of legal correspondence, was the information that Dominic Vasquez, full name, as if she might know more than one, was filing a petition for parental rights and requesting that the court establish a custody arrangement for the child currently in utero, expected date of birth, approximately 32 days from the date of this notice. She read it 3 times. The third time, she noticed her hands were perfectly steady, which told her that some part of her had been waiting for this. The not yet she'd said to Jessie at the park, the 2-word acknowledgement that this was coming, even when she'd tried not to think about it directly. She'd known. The way you know a storm is building even when the sky is still clear. You can feel it in the air before you can see it in the clouds. She set the letter down. She called Carl. He answered immediately. She read in the relevant section. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Okay, this is a different situation than the housing. For this, you need a family law attorney. I know, she said. I don't have one. I know a few people. Let me make some calls this afternoon. He paused. Marin, the fact that he was absent during the pregnancy matters. Document everything. When did he leave? What was the last contact? Any written communication, text, email, anything? Same philosophy as the housing. Keep everything. I have everything, she said. Good. A pause. You doing okay? She looked at the letter. Ask me tomorrow, she said. She sat with it for 2 hours. Then she texted, Jessie, can you talk? His response came in less than a minute. Calling you now. The phone rang before she'd even finished reading the message. She told him everything. Not in fragments, not softly. She told him the whole thing, Dominic's name, and the law firm's name, and the contents of the petition, and the timeline. And Jessie listened, without interrupting, which was one of the things she'd noticed about him early on, that he listened the way some people read fully without skimming. When she finished, he said, He hasn't contacted you once since he left, 7 months ago. 7 months, she confirmed. And he's filing for custody before the baby is even born. Parental rights petition, which his lawyer will argue is a responsible proactive step. She said it in the flat tone of someone who had already heard all the versions of the story that would be told about her, and was not surprised by any of them. Jessie was quiet. She could hear the particular quality of his silence, not absence, but presence, the silence of someone thinking hard about something they care about. The timing, he said slowly. Why now? Oh, why not 6 months ago, or after the birth? I've been asking myself the same thing. Has anything changed recently in your life, or the housing, she said, then stopped. Then said it again, slower, the housing. The extension. It was in the local tenant advocacy newsletter. Carl mentioned it might come up as a case study. They don't use full names, but the details are, she stopped. Specific. Another silence. So he found out you're still here, that you're not leaving. That would be my guess. What does that tell you? She thought about it. that he wasn't expecting me to last this long. Jesse didn't say anything to that, but she could feel what was underneath his silence, the specific shape of anger that a measured person carries, the kind that doesn't heat up and overflow, but goes cold and sharp and purposeful. "Carl's calling family law attorneys this afternoon," she said. "I have documentation. I have his communications, or rather, I have the absence of them, which Carl says is documentation of a different kind." "He's right about that." Jesse paused. "Marin, I want to help with this. Tell me what you need." "I don't know yet what I need," she said honestly. "Right now, I just needed to say it to someone who wasn't going to treat it like a catastrophe." "It's serious," he said. "But it's not a catastrophe." "How are you so sure?" "Because you've handled 3 catastrophes already in the past 8 months. And you're still here, still fighting, still making pasta at 11 o'clock and finishing cover letters." A beat. "Also because Dominic Vasquez walked away from a pregnant woman when she needed him most, and left her alone to handle everything by herself. And family court judges notice things like that." She realized she'd been holding tension in her shoulders since she'd opened the envelope, and that Jesse's voice was slowly letting her put it down. "She's not going to have him the way I didn't have my father," Marin said quietly. I'm not doing it out of spite. He doesn't have the right to walk back in because he's decided it's convenient now." "You're right," Jesse said, "and you can make that case." "I will make that case. I know you will." She looked at the letter again, at the law firm's name, at Dominic's name, printed there in clean black type official, and weighted the name of a man who had pressed one finger in the air and said, "Wait," in a different way than the man in the gray hoodie, but the same fundamental message. "You are less important than what I want right now." "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "When Rachel got sick, I know you had support. Family, friends, whatever. But was there ever a point where you thought about just not letting anyone help? Just handling it alone because asking felt like admitting something you didn't want to admit?" Jesse took a breath. "Every day," he said. "For about the first 4 months." "What changed?" "Rachel told me to stop it." He said it with the quiet half-smile she could always hear in his voice, even when she couldn't see his face. "She said, Jesse, you're not the only person who loves me, and you don't get to carry this alone because it makes you feel more in control." She was right. She was usually right. A pause. "She also said that Lily was going to need me functional more than she needed me stoic." And that one landed. Marin was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Jesse said simply. "You would have liked each other." He said it naturally, without hesitation, and it hung in the air between them, like something that had just quietly expanded the space it occupied. "She didn't have a lot of patience for people who moved one finger in the air either." Marin laughed short and surprised. "God!" She would have absolutely said something to that man. What would she have said? Something devastating and perfectly polite that would have made everyone in earshot cringe, Jesse said. She had a gift for it. "I needed that gift about 4 months ago." "You're developing it," he said. "I've watched you do it." Carl called back at 4 in the afternoon with a name, Patricia Wells, family law attorney, 12 years specializing in custody and parental rights cases, pro bono slots available for qualifying applicants. And Carl said this last part with the measured emphasis of someone delivering good news carefully. She'd reviewed the basic facts of the situation and wanted to schedule a consultation. Marin called Patricia Wells before 5. She had the voice of a woman who had been told a great many things by a great many people, trying to control the narrative, and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them. She asked questions with the efficient precision of someone who has learned to build a case out of details that other people dismiss as small dates, sequences, specific words used in specific conversations, what was said, and what was conspicuously not said. "The absence of communication is significant," Patricia said, echoing Carl. 7 months. No contact, no financial contribution, no inquiry about the pregnancy or your health. We can document that absence,
And the timing of this petition filed as you're in your final month of pregnancy, after a period of public visibility through the tenant advocacy case, that pattern speaks to motivation. What does it say about motivation? Patricia paused, not uncertainly thinking. It says this petition may be less about a genuine desire for parental involvement and more about positioning, establishing a legal claim before the birth so that rights can't be denied after the fact. She was quiet for a second. Miss Cole, I want you to think carefully. Is there anything else about Dominic Vasquez that might be relevant? Anything about his past, his character circumstances you're aware of, that haven't come up yet? Marin thought about it. He was in a serious accident, she said slowly, before I knew him. About 6 years ago. He doesn't talk about it, didn't talk about it. But I know someone was hurt. A young woman. The details were always vague. She stopped. He'd get a particular way when anything about it came up, tight, like a door closing. How do you mean, a young woman was hurt? I don't know the full story. I tried to find things online once about a year into our relationship, because the way he reacted to any mention of it scared me. But I couldn't find much. His name came up in connection with a car accident. There were details I couldn't access court records, I think, or insurance records. She paused. I let it go because I didn't know what I was looking for. Patricia's voice shifted slightly, not dramatically, just the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. Do you remember any specifics, your location, any names mentioned? 2018 or 2019? I think it was in Connecticut. He's from Hartford originally. She paused. There was a name. I remember because it was unusual. Celia Marsh. She heard Patricia writing. Okay, Patricia said. I'm going to do some research before our consultation. When are you available tomorrow? Any time, Marin said. I don't have anywhere else to be. After she hung up, she sat for a long time at her table. She hadn't thought about Celia Marsh in over a year. Hadn't let herself think about it was more accurate. She'd filed it in the folder she kept in the back of her mind, labeled Things That Are Probably Nothing But Feel Like Something, which was the folder she'd been ignoring since she was 17 years old, and had learned that sometimes ignoring the things that feel like something is the only way to get through a day. She pulled her laptop toward her, typed Celia Marsh, Hartford, Connecticut accident into the search bar. Most of the results were unhelpful. But on the fourth page, she found a brief news item from a local Connecticut outlet dated March 2018 about a car accident on Route 44 in which a 23-year-old woman named Celia Marsh had been critically injured. The driver of the other vehicle had not been named. The article referenced only that the case had been turned over to the insurance companies. But one word in the fourth paragraph made Marin stop reading and read it again. Wheelchair. Celia Marsh had been left with spinal damage that would require long-term use of a wheelchair. Marin read the paragraph 3 more times. And then she sat back in her chair and stared at her kitchen ceiling for a long moment. She thought about Dominic, about the way he'd looked at her wheelchair the morning after she'd first come home from the hospital with it, the particular expression she hadn't been able to name at the time, but that she'd cataloged and stored away. She'd thought it was discomfort. She'd told herself it was fear that he was scared for her, and didn't know how to show it right. She understood now, sitting in her kitchen with the cursor blinking in the search bar, that what she'd seen on his face that morning wasn't fear for her. It was recognition. She texted, Jesse, can you come over tonight? I need to show you something. She put her phone down and looked at the search results still open on her screen. At Celia Marsh's name. At the word wheelchair in the fourth paragraph of a 4-year-old news article that Dominic had never in 3 years of their relationship mentioned to her. Not once. Her phone buzzed. Jesse, on my way. Give me 40 minutes. She nodded at the phone, even though no one could see it. Then she opened a new document and started writing down every detail she could remember. Dates, conversations, expressions, the particular way Dominic had gone still on the 2 occasions when the accident had come up, the name he had never said, the story he had never told. Her mother had been right. Keep everything.
Prove it happened. Because if you couldn't prove it, people would act like it didn't. She kept writing. Jesse knocked 43 minutes later. She buzzed him up, and he was at her door, still in his jacket, slightly out of breath, with the look of a man who'd driven faster than the speed limit and was pretending he hadn't. "Where's Lily?" Marin asked. "Neighbors watching her." He stepped inside. She'd never had him in her apartment before, and for a fraction of a second she was aware of it, the smallness of the space, the papers on the counter, the way a home looks when someone else sees it for the first time. But Jesse didn't look around the way visitors usually do, cataloging the space. He looked at her. "Tell me," he said. She showed him the search results. She told him about Celia Marsh and the accident and the wheelchair, and she watched his face while she did the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes stayed steady and focused and very, very still. When she finished, he said he knew. He had to. He watched you the accident, the wheelchair, the whole thing, and he knew. And he still... Jesse stopped, pressed his lips together. "Okay." He said it like a reset, a deliberate downshift from wherever his thoughts were heading. "Okay. Does Patricia Wells know about this?" "Not yet. I found it 20 minutes before I texted you. She needs to know tomorrow. Everything you found, everything you remember." He looked at the document she'd been building on her screen. "Is that what you've been writing?" "Yes." "Good." He looked at her directly. "Marin, this matters. Not just for the custody case, this speaks to his character, his pattern, the kind of person he is." He paused. "A judge is going to want to know this." She looked at the screen. "I keep thinking about Celia Marsh," she said quietly. "Wherever she is. Whatever her life looks like now. He left her in that too, in some version of this." She put one hand on the edge of her desk. "He leaves. That's what he does. He leaves the hard thing, and he finds a way to make it look like the hard thing's fault." Jesse didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix it, or reframe it, or offer a more comfortable version. He just stood there, present the way you stand with someone when what they're saying is true, and hard, and doesn't need anything added to it. "She has a name," Marin said. "My daughter." She looked up at Jesse. "I decided last week, but I haven't told anyone yet." "What is it?" "May." She said it quietly. After my grandmother." Jesse nodded slowly. "May Cole," he said, trying it out. "May Cole," she confirmed. Something settled in his expression. Not sentiment. Something quieter than that something that didn't have a clean name. He looked at her the way you look at something that matters, and that you understand for the first time is going to keep mattering. "May is going to be fine," he said, "because you're her mother." Marin looked at him for a long moment. Outside her window, the city made its nighttime sounds, a car a siren, 2 blocks over the low, ambient hum of 10,000 lives moving alongside each other in the dark. "Don't let me be too proud to ask for help," she said. "If I start doing it again, don't let me." "I won't," he said. She believed him. Patricia Wells had the kind of office that told you everything about how she worked. Stacks of folders on every surface. A whiteboard covered in timelines and initials. 2 coffee cups on the desk. One clearly from that morning, and one from some earlier point in the week. She was in her mid-40s, with the focused, unhurried energy of someone who had learned that urgency and panic were not the same thing, and had chosen a long time ago to operate exclusively in the former. She stood up when Marin came in, and shook her hand with a firmness that said she was not going to treat this gently, and didn't think Marin wanted her to. "I found Celia Marsh," she said before Marin had even fully settled into the chair across from her desk. Marin went still. "Already. I have contacts in Hartford. Family law is a small world, and Connecticut is a smaller one." Patricia sat. She opened a folder. "Celia Marsh is 30 years old. She sustained spinal damage in the accident, consistent with long-term mobility impairment. She did in fact require a wheelchair for approximately 14 months, and has since recovered partial mobility with ongoing physical therapy." She looked up. The driver of the vehicle that struck hers was insured under a policy registered to a Marcus Vasquez of Hartford, Connecticut, Dominic's father.
Marin let that land. He was driving his father's car. He was 24. The insurance settled. There were no criminal charges because it was assessed as an accident, wet road, low visibility. Patricia paused. But here's what matters. In the civil settlement, as a condition of the insurance agreement, Dominic Vasquez signed a statement acknowledging that he had been distracted at the time of impact. Texting. She said the word without inflection. There was a 3-month period during the settlement process where Celia Marsh required full-time care. Dominic Vasquez was in contact with her during that period, legally required contact through the insurance process. And then, once the settlement was finalized, contact ended. He walked away, Marin said. He walked away. Patricia closed the folder. Now, this accident is not directly relevant to your custody case. I need to be clear about that. What it is relevant to is pattern, character. The argument we make is not that Dominic is a criminal. He isn't legally. The argument we make is that Dominic Vasquez has a documented history of removing himself from situations of difficulty and long-term responsibility, specifically when those situations involve someone in a position of physical vulnerability. She held Marin's gaze. You, Celia Marsh. The pattern is not subtle. Marin was quiet for a moment. He filed this petition because he wants the legal right, she said, not because he wants to be a father. That's what the evidence suggests. And family court judges read evidence. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Marin, I want you to understand something. You have spent 7 months building a case without knowing you were building it. Every email you saved, every record of the payment plan, every absent text from Dominic, it all speaks. You have documentation of what he did and what he didn't do. Sat back. We are going to be ready. She didn't tell Jesse everything Patricia had said. Not because she was hiding it, but because some part of her needed to hold it alone for a day to walk around, inside the information to understand what it felt like in her body, before she put it into words for someone else. She'd been doing that since she was a kid, needing to process alone first, needing to know what she thought before she was asked what she thought. What she told him was that the consultation had gone well, and that Patricia was building the case, and that she felt for the first time since the letter arrived like she was in the right hands. Good, he said. They were on the phone. It was late past 9. Lily was in bed. How are you feeling, physically, I mean? He paused. You have a lot going on in your body right now, on top of everything else. My back was bad yesterday, she admitted. The stress doesn't help. Are you sleeping? Better than I was. Are you eating something that isn't crackers? She looked at the bowl on her table, which was in fact crackers, and also some cheese, which she felt was a meaningful upgrade. Mostly, she said. Marin. I'm eating, she said. Jesse, I'm okay. A pause. Can I come over Saturday? I have to pick up supplies from the hardware store in the morning. But after that, I want to take a look at the ramp on your building. You mentioned the crack a while back, and I keep thinking about it. You don't have to fix my building's ramp. I know, he said, for what she had come to understand was roughly the 100th time the 2-word answer that was the most consistent thing about him. But I'm going to anyway. Saturday was November 8th. She remembered the date later, specifically because it was the day everything between them shifted, in a way that neither of them named, but both of them knew. He showed up at 10 in the morning with a bag of tools, and Lily, who was wearing a paint-stained jacket and carrying her purple notebook, and announced immediately upon entering the building's lobby that she had decided to draw every room. Just the common areas, Jesse said. What's a common area? Lily asked. Areas that are common. Lily considered this philosophically and began drawing the lobby. Jesse assessed the ramp, went back to his truck, came back with additional materials, and spent 40 minutes on the repair with the focused quiet of someone who has spent enough time working with his hands that the work doesn't require conversation. Marin sat near the door and watched him and tried twice to help with things and was redirected, both times not dismissively, but with the calm certainty of someone who had a system and was not going to introduce variables. You're controlling, she said from her chair. I prefer systematic, he said without looking up.
Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, he agreed easily. They're not. When he was done with the ramp, he came inside and washed his hands in the lobby bathroom, and then, without asking, followed Marin to her apartment. She let him in with the ease of someone who has already passed the threshold of deciding that a person is safe, a threshold she realized. Passed with Jesse, somewhere between the parking lot and the park bench and the 43-minute drive to her apartment on the night she'd found the article about Celia Marsh. Lily stationed herself at the kitchen table with her notebook. Jesse stood in the middle of the apartment and looked around with a different quality of attention than most people brought to looking at a room. The careful, practical eye of someone reading a space for what it needed rather than what it was. "The counter's too high," he said. "Yes," she said. "And the cabinet handles, those round ones, are hard to grip, right?" "I've been managing." He crossed to the kitchen and opened and closed 2 cabinets. Testing the handles, the range of motion required the angles. Then he looked at the bathroom door. "Can you get through that comfortably?" "Barely." He nodded, still looking, his hands on his hips. "I can fix the counter height. Probably take me 2 trips. I'd need to get the right materials. And the cabinet handles I can do today. I have pull bars in the truck." He turned to her. "The bathroom door would need to be widened, which requires a permit, and is a landlord issue. But I can measure it and put together the request in writing, so you have something to hand them." She stared at him. "Jesse, this is my apartment. You just fixed the ramp on my building. The ramp took 40 minutes. That's not—" She stopped, breathed. "Don't be too proud to ask for help." She hadn't asked exactly, but the principle was adjacent. Let people do what they want to do. Stop counting the cost of someone else's kindness. "Oh, okay," she said. "Thank you." He got the pull bars from the truck and spent another 40 minutes replacing the cabinet handles while Lily drew what she described as a map of the whole house and what appeared to be, from what Marin could see, an impressionistic rendering of the apartment with all the furniture slightly wrong and one inexplicable horse in the corner of the kitchen. "There's a horse," Marin observed. "That's not a horse," Lily said with dignity. "That's you." Marin looked at Jesse. Jesse looked at the ceiling. "I'm honored," Marin said carefully. "You have a good face," Lily said, which appeared to be her final word on the subject. She added a small detail to the horse drawing and nodded satisfied. Jesse, from under the cabinet, made a sound that was definitely a suppressed laugh. They stayed for lunch sandwiches that Jesse made from things he'd stopped to buy on the way over, which Marin only learned when she saw the grocery bag he'd left by the door. She didn't say anything about the grocery bag. She sat at her table and ate her sandwich, and listened to Lily describe a conflict at kindergarten involving a disputed glitter allocation. And it occurred to her, sitting there, that her apartment had not had this in it before. This specific thing. The sound of a child explaining something important with full seriousness. The smell of food someone else had made, the feeling of a room being inhabited rather than just occupied. She'd lived alone since Dominic left. Before that, she'd lived with Dominic, which turned out to have been its own kind of alone. She looked at Jesse across the table, who was asking Lily with complete sincerity whether the glitter dispute had been resolved through negotiation or arbitration, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel in the middle of a custody battle, and an eviction extension, and 30 weeks of pregnancy, and 4 months in a wheelchair. She felt content. Not happy exactly. Happiness was a bigger word and a more fragile thing. But content. Like the room was the right size. Like the people in it were the right people. She filed that feeling away carefully in the part of herself that wasn't sure yet what to do with it. After lunch, Lily presented her with the finished drawing, the apartment map, the inexplicable horse, and a small figure at the center of the page that was identifiably a woman in a wheelchair with a large, round stomach, surrounded by what appeared to be stars. "That's May," Lily said, pointing at the stomach. "I drew her already because she's coming soon." Marin looked at the drawing. At her own name in Lily's handwriting, at the bottom spelled Maren, with an E, which was wrong and also perfect. "Thank you, Lily," she said, and her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. Lily patted her hand once briskly, the way a very small adult might. "You're welcome." she said, and went back to her notebook.
Jessie caught Marin's eye across the table. She shook her head slightly. The universal signal for don't acknowledge this, or I'll cry and I'm not doing that. And he nodded, understanding immediately, and refilled his water glass and said something to Lily about whether the horse was a different art piece or part of the map, and the moment passed held between them without being spoken. 3 days later, Dominic called. She didn't recognize the number he'd changed it, which told her he'd expected her to block the old one, which told her he knew on some level how this looked. She almost didn't answer. Then she thought about Patricia, about documentation, about everything her mother had ever told her about keeping records,
and she answered, "Marin!" His voice was the same. She didn't know what she'd expected, some audible mark of everything that had happened, but he just sounded like himself, which was somehow worse. "Dominic," she said, "I wanted to talk before everything goes through lawyers." He had the careful tone of someone who had been coached. "I don't want this to be a fight." "Then you should have called 7 months ago," she said, "before it was a fight." "I know, A pause. "I handled things badly. When you were in the accident, Dominic." She said his name the way you cut a rope. "Clean." "What do you want?" Another pause. The coached composure slipping slightly at the edges. "I want to be part of my daughter's life." "You don't know it's a daughter." "I just assumed." "Her name is May," she said. "And you forfeited the right to assume anything about her when you left." Silence on the line. Then? "The petition isn't meant to be aggressive. And my lawyer says I have a lawyer too," she said. "Oh, who I'm going to send this call to as documentation. So I'm going to ask you one time to say clearly on this recorded line whether you have any interest in May's well-being beyond establishing a legal claim." The silence this time was longer. "I just want to be fair," he said. "To who?" He didn't answer. "That's what I thought," she said, and ended the call. She sat for 30 seconds. Her hands were shaking this time, not out of fear, she understood clearly, but out of something older and less manageable, the particular physiological response of a body that has held something tightly for a very long time and has just for the first time put it down. She called Patricia, got voicemail, left a complete account of the conversation dates and timestamps every specific word she could recall. Then she texted Jesse. "He called. I recorded it. I'm okay." His response came in 2 minutes. "You're sure you're okay?" She thought about the question honestly. About the shaking hands and the quiet apartment, and the drawing on her refrigerator tape there, with a piece of painter's tape Jessie had left on her counter, the drawing of herself, as a horse, surrounded by stars with May, already drawn into the picture even before she'd arrived. "Yes," she typed back. "For real this time. I'm sure." She put the phone down and looked at the drawing. Lily had put stars around the whole thing. Not just around Marin and May, but around the whole apartment, the table, the cabinets with their new pull-bar handles, the doorways, the map of the space that was becoming slowly, and with help, the kind of home a person could actually live inside, rather than just survive in. Marin pressed one hand flat on the table. The table held. She thought, I know where the floor is now. Then, she thought Jessie was right. Once you know where the floor is, you stop being so afraid of falling. She looked at the calendar on her wall. May's due date was circled in red marker. She'd done it months ago alone when the only thing it represented was a deadline. Something to get to. Something to survive until... It didn't look like a deadline anymore. It looked like a beginning. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in December, 3 weeks before May's due date. Patricia had spent 2 weeks preparing Marin with the particular thoroughness of someone who understood that the courtroom was only part of the battle, that the other part happened in the hours before, in the way a person carried herself when the opposing attorney looked at her, in the way she answered questions that were designed to make her sound unreasonable, unstable, incapable. She ran Marin through every version of the questions Dominic's attorney might ask. She pushed hard. She didn't soften the edges. He's going to argue that your current circumstances make stable parenting difficult, Patricia said in their last preparation session. The wheelchair, the housing situation, the financial pressure.
He's going to frame vulnerability as incapacity.
I know, Marin said. And when he does, you don't get angry. You don't defend yourself the way you want to. You answer with facts. Patricia looked at her steadily. Can you do that? Yes, Marin said. And then, because Patricia deserved honesty, it's going to take everything I have. I know, Patricia said. Do it anyway. Jesse drove her to the courthouse. She hadn't asked him to. She'd told him the date and the time matter-of-factly, the way she'd started telling him things since the night with the Celia Marsh article. And he'd said, I'll take Lily to school and meet you at your building at 8:15. No negotiation. No, are you sure you want me there? Just a time and a plan offered like something simple and obvious, which it was. He was there at 8:12. She came down in the elevator, and he was in the lobby, still in his jacket, holding 2 coffees. He handed her one without ceremony. How are you feeling? He asked. Like, I want it to be over, she said. That's fair. They didn't talk much on the drive. Jesse had the radio on low, not music, one of the morning news programs. The sound of it familiar and ambient, the kind of background noise that lets 2 people sit in a car together, without the silence, feeling like something that needs to be filled. Marin looked out the window and went over the facts in her mind, the way Patricia had taught her. Not the feelings, not the story as she lived it, but the specific documented record of what had happened and when and what could be proven. 7 months, no contact, no financial support, no inquiry into her health or the pregnancy. One phone call initiated by him 3 weeks ago, recorded with permission under state law, in which he had been unable to answer a direct question about May's well-being, without retreating into legal language about fairness. Those were the facts. She held them in order, like stones in her hand. Jesse pulled up to the courthouse and stopped at the curb. He didn't get out immediately. He turned slightly in his seat and looked at her. Whatever happens in there, he said. May already has you. That's already done. That's not something any judge or attorney or petition is going to change. She looked at him. I know, she said. I've known that for a while. She picked up the coffee cup. Thank you for being here. I'll be in the waiting area, he said. Take as long as you need. She nodded. She straightened her jacket. She pushed through the door of the courthouse like a woman who had been practicing all her life for exactly this. The specific skill of walking into a room where the stakes are high, and the other side has money and time and legal history, and standing there anyway, with her documentation and her lawyer, and the absolute undecorated truth of who she was and what she'd done. She did not look like someone who needed to be managed. She looked like someone's mother. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Dominic's attorney was good, efficient, and well prepared with the smooth, slightly aggressive confidence of someone who had won similar cases before, and believed this one was structurally the same. He presented the petition as responsible, forward-thinking, the act of a man who wanted to be involved in his child's life. He framed Dominic's absence during the pregnancy as a period of reflection and personal difficulty, which was exactly the kind of language Patricia had told Marin to expect, and which was exactly as infuriating in the room as it had been in the preparation sessions. Marin sat and listened and kept her face neutral. It took everything she had. Patricia was better. She didn't rush. She'd laid the record out in sequence. The departure date, the documented absence, the financial non-contribution, the single phone call and its contents, the text messages from the early months of the pregnancy that showed a man already in the process of leaving, before he'd physically left. She presented the Celia Marsh material, not as a character assassination, but as pattern evidence, calmly, factually, with the court records from the insurance settlement attached, and the timeline clearly drawn. When Dominic's attorney objected that the Marsh accident was irrelevant to current parental fitness, Patricia said, Your Honor, we're not arguing that Mr. Vasquez is a criminal. We're arguing that he has a documented history of establishing contact with vulnerable women, withdrawing at the moment sustained responsibility is required, and then re-engaging when the legal or practical landscape shifts in his favor. The parallel to the current situation is not incidental. The judge, a woman in her 60s, with the composed assessing manner of someone who had heard every version of every family story and could read the difference between a performance and a truth, made a note on her pad. When it was Marin's turn to speak directly, she was asked by Dominic's attorney whether she believed a child could thrive with two involved parents, rather than one. She said, "Yes, I believe that completely. I also believe that the word involved requires a history of involvement, and Mr.
Vasquez has not built that history. Showing up at the legal moment most advantageous to him is not involvement. It's positioning." She heard Patricia exhale quietly beside her. The judge made another note. The ruling didn't come that day. The judge took the case under advisement, which Patricia had anticipated. She'd told Marin that a same-day ruling was unlikely, that the Marsh evidence added complexity the court would want to consider carefully. They came out of the courthouse at 1:15 into the cold December air, and Patricia put a hand briefly on Marin's shoulder and said, "You did well. Better than well. When will we know? 10 to 15 business days, possibly sooner." Patricia looked at her steadily. "I want you to understand that the record we presented today is strong. I can't guarantee an outcome, no one can, but I can tell you that the judge was listening, really listening." She squeezed Marin's shoulder once and let go. "Go home, rest." Take care of yourself in May. Jesse was in the waiting area when she came through the doors, exactly where he'd said he would be sitting, with his elbows on his knees and his phone face down on the seat beside him, which meant he hadn't been on it, which meant he'd just been sitting there, waiting for 4 hours without the mitigation of distraction. He stood up when he saw her. She crossed the lobby toward him, and when she reached him, she stopped, and she was suddenly so tired. Not dramatically, not in collapse, but in the deep, structural way that comes after you've held something at full tension for a very long time, that she put her forehead briefly against his shoulder, just for a second, just long enough to let the weight go somewhere that wasn't entirely inside her own body. He didn't say anything. He just put one hand on her back, steady and still. She straightened up. "Patricia thinks it went well." "Oh, yeah." His voice was careful, calibrated to match what she needed. "Yeah." She looked at the courthouse doors. "I won't know for 2 weeks, but I said everything that needed to be said. The record is right." She turned back to him. "Let's go get Lily." Something shifted in his face, something that opened slightly briefly, and then settled back into the composed expression he usually wore. But she'd seen it, and it sat with her on the drive to the school, warm and complicated, and entirely her own. May arrived 11 days later, on a Wednesday morning at 6:43 a.m., in a delivery room where Marin had asked for no one except the medical team, because she had always wanted to meet her daughter in a room where the first thing May experienced was her mother's voice, and nothing else complicated. She was 6 pounds and 4 ounces. She had dark hair and Marin's particular expression of intense, focused consideration, which the nurse said was remarkable, and which Marin felt was simply accurate. She lay in the hospital bed with May on her chest, and put her lips against the top of her daughter's head, and said quietly into the soft warmth of that new existence, "Hi, May. I'm your mom. We've been through some stuff together already, and we're going to go through more, and I need you to know from the very beginning that I am not going anywhere. Not ever. Not for anything." May made a small sound. Her hand closed around Marin's finger. Marin closed her eyes. She stayed like that for a long time. Jesse brought Lily to the hospital that afternoon. Marin had texted him from the delivery room just, "She's here. She's perfect." And he'd responded with a single line, "We'll come this afternoon if that's okay." She'd said yes, before she'd finished reading the message. Lily walked into the hospital room with the heightened solemnity of a person entering a space where something important had just happened. She stood at the edge of the bed and looked at May with the absolute focused attention she brought to drawings and duck negotiations and disputes about glitter. "She's really small," Lily said. "She was smaller 6 hours ago," Marin said. Lily considered this. "Does she know her name yet?" "I told her when she got here." "What did she say?" "She grabbed my finger." Lily nodded. "That means she likes it." She looked at Jesse. "Can I touch her hand?" "Ask Marin," Jesse said. Lily looked at Marin. "Can I touch her hand?"
Gently, Marin said. One finger. Lily extended one finger carefully with the expression of a person performing a delicate and significant task, and touched the back of May's hand. May's fingers moved. Lily looked up at Marin with an expression of pure, undefended wonder. She moved, Lily whispered.
She knows you, Marin said, which wasn't scientifically supportable and was completely true. Jessie stood near the window, slightly back from the bed, letting Lily have the moment. When Lily eventually moved to inspect the various medical equipment, with the systematic curiosity she applied to all new environments, he came closer and looked at May for the first time, and his face did what it had done in the courthouse lobby, opened slightly briefly, showing something underneath the composure that was large and quiet and did not require words. "Hi, May," he said softly. May, who had been awake and observant with the watchful concentration of someone taking inventory of a new world, turned her face very slightly toward the sound of his voice. Jessie looked at Marin. Marin looked at him. Neither of them said anything, and both of them understood everything that was contained in the silence. The judge's ruling came 8 days after May was born.
Marin was in her apartment, May asleep on her chest in the wrap carrier Jessie had ordered online, and assembled at her kitchen table. On the afternoon he'd brought takeout from the Thai place she'd mentioned once in passing, 3 weeks before the birth. She was reading the ruling on her phone with one hand, the other pressed flat against May's back, feeling her breathe. The ruling was 19 pages. Patricia had sent it with a text that said, "Read, page 12 first." Page 12 contained the court's assessment of the parental rights petition. The language was formal, measured, and definitive. The petition was denied in its current form. The court found insufficient evidence of sustained parental intent, and noted with the particular care that judges use when they want the language to be cited later, that the pattern of absence documented in the record was not consistent with a genuine and established interest in the child's welfare. The Marsh evidence was acknowledged in a footnote that made clear the court had taken it seriously. Dominic could file again in 6 months with demonstrated evidence of changed circumstances. The ruling made clear quietly, but completely, that the bar for that filing would be high. Marin read page 12 3 times. Then she read it again.
Then she put the phone face down on the table and pressed both hands against May's back and breathed. "We're okay," she said to the top of May's head. "We're okay. We did it." May slept completely unconcerned because she was 8 days old, and she had always trusted her mother completely, even before she knew she was doing it. Marin called Patricia first. Patricia said, "I told you the record was strong." She sounded satisfied in the particular way of people who do hard work and occasionally rightfully get to be right about it. This isn't final forever, he can refile. But the bar is significantly higher now, and he knows it.
My guess is we won't hear from him for a long time, if ever. What does your experience say? Men like Dominic Vasquez don't pursue battles they've decided they can't win, Patricia said. He wanted the legal position. He doesn't have it now. That changes his calculation. A pause. How's May? Perfect, Marin said. Completely perfect. Good. Patricia's voice warmed slightly, the way it did sometimes when the professional and human edges of her blurred for a moment. Take care of her, and yourself. Call me if anything changes. She called Jessie next. He answered immediately. Page 12, she said. He was quiet for a second. Denied. Denied. Her voice broke on the word, not in grief, but in the way a voice breaks, when the pressure behind it is suddenly released, when the breath you've been holding for weeks finally actually lets go. It's done, for now. Patricia says he's unlikely to refile. Jessie said her name once. Just her name. The way you say a name, when there isn't a better word, and a name, will have to be enough. And it is. It's exactly enough. She laughed, the kind that lives right next to tears. The borderless kind. I'm okay. Yes. We're okay. I know you are, he said. I've known that for a while. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. Can you come over tonight? I want to... I don't know. I want people around. I want May to be in a room with people who... She stopped. Who what? Who already love her.
she said, quietly, without looking away from what those words meant. The pause on Jesse's end was exactly the length of a person deciding whether to say the next true thing. We'll be there at 6, he said. Lily is going to want to hold her. I know, Marin said. Lily can hold her.
They ate dinner at Marin's table, the table with the new pull bar handles, on the cabinets around it in the apartment that was quieter than it used to be, about where the floor was with May and the bassinet Jesse had helped her build from a flat-pack box on the night Marin had brought it home from the store, and then sat in front of it for 10 minutes, holding the instructions without reading them. He'd knocked on the door an hour later with dinner, and had the bassinet assembled before the food was cold, with Lily supervising from the couch with the purple notebook. Lily was now holding May with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been given responsibility and was not going to fail it. She was sitting very straight, May, cradled in both arms, talking to her in a low, private voice about something Marin couldn't quite hear. She didn't try to. Some conversations were not for everyone. Jesse was washing dishes. Marin had told him not to, and he'd said, I know, and done it anyway, which was so entirely himself that she'd stopped arguing and sat at the table and let it happen. She watched him at her sink and watched Lily with her daughter in the next room, and felt the specific shape of the thing that had been building since a Tuesday in late October, when a wheel caught on a chair and a man stood up without rushing the way you stand to get a glass of water. Jesse, she said. He looked over his shoulder. I need to tell you something. He turned off the water and turned around and leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, which was how he stood when he was paying full attention, she'd learned. Okay, he said. She looked at him directly. This was the thing she'd been carrying since the courthouse lobby, since the hospital room, since the kitchen table where she'd pressed her hands flat and found the floor and thought of him. She was not a person who said things she didn't mean, and she was not going to be cautious with this one. I don't know what this is, she said. I'm not asking you to name it. I know you had Rachel, and I know that's not something that has an easy story after it. I'm not saying I need anything from you right now, except what you've already given me. She paused. But I need you to know that you changed my life. Not just the chair and Carl and the ramp and the bassinet. You, the way you saw me. The way you just saw me in that cafe when everyone else had decided I was invisible. Her voice was steady. I needed someone to do that so badly that I'd stop believing anyone would. And then you did. And it reminded me who I was. She held his gaze. I needed you to know that. Out loud, in words. The kitchen was quiet. In the other room, Lily was still talking quietly to May, a running narrative of important information. Jesse looked at her for a long moment. The look she'd come to know, the one that processed things fully before he spoke, that was incapable of the small dishonesty of rushing to an answer. When Rachel died, he said, there was a long time when I didn't think I was going to be someone who got another chance at this, at any of this. He said it carefully with the honesty of a man who doesn't make promises he can't keep and doesn't say things he doesn't mean. And then I moved a chair. He paused. And I got to watch you fight for yourself and for May and for everyone who was ever ignored or moved aside or told to wait their turn. And I thought, he stopped. I thought whoever gets to be around this woman is going to be very, very lucky. She looked at him. Are you saying you want to be around this woman? I'm saying I already am, he said. And I'm not in a hurry, and I don't need to name it tonight. He met her eyes. But yeah, I want to be around this woman. She let out a slow breath. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. From the living room, Lily called with great urgency. She smiled at me. Jesse and Marin both turned to look. Lily was holding May up slightly, face to face, with the expression of someone who has received important confirmation. She's probably too young to smile, Jesse said toward the doorway. She smiled, Lily said with the flat certainty of a person who is not interested in developmental timelines. I saw it. Marin looked at Jesse. Jesse looked at Marin. And they both, at exactly the same moment, made the same decision to not argue, to simply allow the thing to be what the person who saw it said it was. Then she smiled, Marin said. Lily nodded. I knew she would, she said, and went back to her conversation.
3 weeks later, Marin got an email. The subject line was graphic design contract position, remote accessible.
The company was a mid-sized marketing firm she'd sent an application to in late November, in the stretch of time between the hearing and the ruling, when she'd been surviving on 5-hour sleep segments and cold coffee and the specific determination of someone who understands that the future needs to be built in the present, regardless of what the present feels like. The rate was good. The hours were flexible. The work was exactly what she'd been doing before the accident. Before Dominic, before the wheelchair and the rejection letters, and the cracked sidewalk and the cafe. She said yes before she finished reading the email. She told Jesse that night on the phone, and he said, "Of course you did," in the tone that meant he was not surprised, had never been surprised, had always been watching her rebuild from a distance, close enough to see the whole thing clearly. She told May in the dark, that night lying in bed with her daughter, in the crook of her arm, the way they'd been sleeping since the hospital. May making the small sounds of someone dreaming already, some internal world already forming behind those dark, serious eyes. "We're going to be okay," she said. For the 100th time, or maybe the 1,000th, the words that had been a promise in the hardest months, and were now slowly becoming a description. Not because it got easier, it didn't get easier, but because we know where the floor is now, and we know who's standing near enough to catch us if we fall. She pressed her lips to May's forehead, and we know how to let them. Outside the city was its nighttime self, the sounds of 10,000 lives, all the ordinary noise of people getting through their days and their nights and their years, some of them carrying things they couldn't put down, and some of them in cafes where nobody looked up, and some of them somewhere about to stand up and move a chair, and not know yet what that small act was going to set in motion. Marin closed her eyes. May breathed in, breathed out. Her hand curled against Marin's arm, the same grip she'd had from the very first minute, sure and steady and completely without doubt. And in the morning, Marin Cole was going to wake up and make coffee, and look at her daughter's face, and go to work. Not because someone had saved her, because she had never, not once, stopped saving herself. And she'd finally learned that those two things were not opposites, that accepting a hand was not the same as losing your footing, that being seen by someone was not weakness, but the most human thing there was. She had fought her way through every room that tried to make her invisible. She had kept every document, every record, every proof of what had actually happened. She had let someone move a chair for her, and let that be the beginning of something real. And now she had May, 6 pounds and 4 ounces of absolute proof that the hardest chapters of a story are not the last ones that the floor holds. When you finally stop being afraid to stand on it, that love does not announce itself in grand gestures, but in small, deliberate acts, in a chair moved in a cup of tea, in a man who shows up at 8:12 in the morning with coffee, and no explanation except that he said he would. Marin Cole had been invisible to an entire room once. She was never going to let that define her, and May was never going to know what it felt like. That was already decided. That was already done.